This is the baptism hammer, one of my favorite modules at the intensive. So it's real simple. Everybody at the intensive is going to have this sheet of paper um, in front of them to get started. And so the instructions are really straightforward and simple. What you're going to do is you're just going to have this first verse up here, Acts chapter 2, verse 36 to 41, and then you're going to have who was baptized, when were they baptized, who is a baptizer, and where. And then you'll do that as in front of them as a group. You will do that in front of the group. You'll model for that. And so what we see here is we would read it, and then those who believed, and then that was the 3,000, right? About 3,000, actually. It doesn't say exactly about and when. It was obviously that day. And who was the baptizer? We don't know. It's unnamed. We assume it was, well, no, we really don't want to assume anything. And we don't necessarily know where it was. It was obviously in Jerusalem somewhere. And so what they're going to do at their tables with their team, they're going to walk through, someone's going to read this, and then they're going to answer these simple questions. So that's the instructions. And when they're done at the table, what are their key reflections or takeaway from this exercise? All right. So you give them to the table, and this should take, I don't, this, man, I always say 10 to 15 minutes to do. I'd say 15 on the top because you want to have reflections and let them talk about what they learned. And then you're going to come back, and while they are doing this at the tables, you're putting the other verses in on the whiteboard. All right, so pretty simple. And so when they come back, you begin to fill, and you might go to each table. All right, table one, what'd you get from Mac? And we just work our way over. Um, so this is ultimately what it looks like at the end, and I just typed all this in and make it a little bit simpler. Um, and so you'll see the who was baptized gets very specific. And then you'll see a trend when almost immediately in every example or very quickly. Only one of well, two of the seven or whatever, we get Philip and then Paul here. We do find out later in First Corinthians that I think Paul baptized Crispus, and so, but for Luke, that's not really a big deal, as we'll see. And then the where, we don't know. We know with Philip, it was some water on the way. And so you fill all these in, and then you just ask the groups, what's your key takeaway? And just listen to what they say. And a lot of cool stuff going on there. These are just supplemental verses, just for maybe the presenter to know. First Corinthians, Paul's not baptizing; he's handing off authority quickly. John chapter 4, Jesus was not baptizing, but his disciples were very early on in his ministry. And of course, Matthew 20:18 through 20, Jesus is giving us all authority to baptize. It's not coming from the church; it's coming from Jesus. And of course, Romans 6:3 is the baptism. We're baptized into Christ, into his name, and not necessarily church. And so these are just kind of other questions as we're in the takeaway piece is we ask how much of the Great Commission are you willing to obey, and how much are you willing to teach others to obey? Key questions. So these are some of the key takeaways. And again, this is all just as you're up front and you're navigating the discussion or the takeaways. The key takeaways that we should be looking for is Luke does not reveal who the baptizer was. It doesn't seem to be important to him. That doesn't. If he would have named these people. How quickly were they baptized? Uh, Pretty quickly, almost immediately. There was no class. There was not a delayed obedience. The people being baptized were people who were aware of their decision, not young children who are unaware of decision. In many cases, there was no church present. Fascinating. In a few of the cases, the people immediately went back to their sphere of influence, obviously with Lydia, Cornelius, the jailer, and so forth, and Crispus. and where they were baptized wasn't mentioned. These are important takeaways. These are a lot of these questions are very important in traditions that we are part of, but according to Luke, they really weren't really at the forefront. And so, also, one other thing, this is just a kind of a caveat. I mentioned that is almost all the passages that we use to justify baptism by immersion in the Bible come from these passages. So we pull away the fact that we need to be baptized, immersed in water, and brought back out. And we use these passages and the Greek word for baptize in these passages to define exactly how we're supposed to baptize people. It only stands to reason that if it's good enough for that purpose, it's also good enough to draw some other conclusions from these verses about who was baptized, when were they baptized, who is the baptizer, and where. And so this is the baptism hammer.